Thanks, Ian. Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Live with me, Ros Astengo. Today I'm delighted to welcome my guest who is responsible for around 6,000 government workers. No easy feat, I'm sure, especially given the fact that we're in a global pandemic and facing an uncertain Brexit in just a few months. Just how is he managing all these government departments and liaising with government ministers as well? Joining me in the studio is the Chief Secretary and Head of the Civil Service, Darren Grech. Hi, Darren. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. No pressure at all.
I was going to say, you probably feel exhausted just listening to all of that.
No, it's okay. Thank you for having me.
Darren, can you just tell us, first of all, briefly, what is your role as Chief Secretary? And, you know, you do seem to be in a bit of a rock and a hard place, navigating between 10 ministers and 6,000 government workers. Tell us how you do it.
Okay. For me, it's very clear. My role is divided into three separate things, although they interlink. First and foremost, I'm responsible for the administration and delivering of government policy, which is not the same as distilling the policy. There are two different things. To administer the policy, yes. To implement the policy that is designed by political government. How
much input do you have in the designing of it? Because obviously you have to let them know whether it's possible or not.
Of course, and not only that, I have a fair free range to engage with the Chief Minister in particular, although I do also engage with the other ministers, and advice on the way forward. Sometimes that advice is accepted. Sometimes the advice is rejected, and I accept that that is the way it is meant to be. Ultimately, my responsibility as the head of the public service really is to implement the policy. But I do, of course, advise. And if I think the policy is not particularly a good one, I certainly will say, except that at the end of the day, it is political government, it is the Chief Minister, it is the cabinet that decides.
Tell us what's been the most challenging aspect of managing the civil and public service during the pandemic and Brexit. What's the most challenging for you?
Well, you got to remember that I took up this role and the number one priority was to deliver on civil/public service reform. We were caught up in a journey and had a very clear idea of where it was that we wanted to go. Between all that, there is this not insignificant thing called Brexit happening, and the very real possibility of a no-deal scenario, and then the trouble that would ensue. So that, in a way, derailed a little bit our journey. And even within Brexit, then a little bug called COVID-19 comes along and adds further fuel to the fire. So if you like, the journey is still there, and we most certainly will deliver on the journey of where we want to be. But we have been somewhat sidetracked by Brexit and certainly by COVID. Insofar as Brexit is concerned, Brexit, in my opinion, starts and finishes at the border with border fluidity. And if we don't have that, then we're in trouble. Because then we need to think about alternatives and a transition towards
I'm sorry, with respect, you know, there's been quite a long period during which you could be thinking about what to do if there is a no-deal scenario. I mean, it's been, ever since Boris Johnson came into power, became Prime Minister, there was always a possibility that there's a no-deal. Where are we now with that? Because we heard yesterday that, you know, we can expect delays at the frontier if there is no deal. But what sort of preparations have you done?
Well, the preparations are in place. I mean, they're in place for a deal and for a no deal. But what people need to understand, without going into the detail, because you're obviously subject to a very constrained amount of time here today, is that no deal means taking a hit. And the transition towards a small island economy is not going to be an easy one, and it's going to take time. So preferably, we would need a deal and we would need border fluidity.
Okay, well, talk about your vision and your plans for the civil service, the public service, a little bit later on. Let's just talk about the nitty-gritty, some of the things that
The bits you love, yeah.
the people are talking about.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure you, as well as we, scan social media. We get a gist of what people are talking about. And there has been a lot of discontent about public counters being closed. Now, you know, people have complained that phones haven't been answered, online services are not up to scratch, forms or payments have been taken weeks to be processed or sent, education grants not being paid, you know, no one to help with problems. These are just some of the complaints that we've all seen over recent months on social media. Now, what's going on? Isn't this your responsibility to ensure that the public sector is working efficiently?
Okay, so I am ultimately responsible. I always say to the people that I lead, I might delegate the task, but I never delegate the responsibility. So when something goes wrong, it's fairly and squarely on me, on my watch. And I have to accept responsibility for things which have gone wrong. Not everything has gone wrong. Sometimes within social media, it is a little bit of a comment, and then the comment kind of catches fire, and then there are more comments. But look, I accept fully 100% that things have not been perfect. Can I take it to the counters? The decision on the shutting of counters is a COVID-motivated decision taken by political government, and it's taken, in my opinion, for the right reasons. Counters.
Did you agree with that decision?
You're asking for my opinion?
Yes.
I agree. I agreed, and I still agree with that decision. But I need to qualify that. Look, moving forward in the kind of vision that certainly I have, but I know that political government has for the civil service and for the public service at large, is that people, the users of the service, the public, need to interact with service providers in a more modern way. We want to be able to do things through an app on a phone, almost with one hand, through an iPad. It is, of course, true that if things are not working and if the scaffolding is not in place, then you end up with a mess. And yeah, by all means.
Chief Secretary, sorry, I want to say that doesn't really serve or help a large, sector of the population. People do want to speak to someone. They want to know that there's someone at the other end of the line. Not everyone wants to use an app.
Exactly. And it's the second part of my message to you here today. And that is to say that, look, the way that my daughters or my son interact with a mobile phone is certainly not the way that my mother interacts with a mobile phone. And therefore, there needs to be the safety net in place to deal with people like my mum who want to go to a place and want to find a familiar face there who is willing to help. But I'm not abdicating responsibility, if I may. Just on the journey, if you actually choose to embark on a home improvement journey, then during the journey, you are going to get rubble, you're going to get dust, you are going to get dangling cables at home. You still need to live in the house. But at the end of the journey, if I may, hopefully you'll look upon the house and think, wow, it was really worth it. Now, the journey is troublesome. And for sure, 100% on my watch and on my responsibility, we have failed people. And for that, I have to apologize.
Are public counters, all of them, going to remain closed? Or will you rethink this policy decision, given the reaction from the public and also the Chief Minister's admission that eGov isn't where he would like it to be just yet?
And I would agree with the Chief Minister that eGov isn't where he would like it to be yet. My advice, remember that I do not distill policy, my advice would always be this. Let us modernize the civil service. Let us move towards an e-government interaction with service providers, but, and it's an important but, let us keep a safety net, a central hub of counters where an old lady or a gentleman, or it doesn't have to be an old lady or a gentleman, somebody who's not tech savvy can go and receive the necessary help. That is my view.
What does the government think about that view, the ministers? Is that something that's going to become a reality?
I can tell you that it's aligned.
Okay. And when can we expect something?
I wouldn't like to comment because we're caught up on a journey where clearly, because of the what we've discussed previously, we are caught up with various competing priorities. But certainly We'll go on to talk about vision later, and vision necessarily dictates that we have a modernized public service. We could have a look at Estonia, for example. We could have a look at Finland, and I am particularly very well versed with the versions. And if you asked me, it is where we should be going.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more tough question on the MOT.
Only one.
Sorry, before we move on to another subject.
Okay.
I've got a clip here from the Chief Minister, and it was taken from Direct Democracy with our editor, Christine Vasquez, talking about the MOT department. Now, I would just like to say this. I'm not targeting the staff at the MOT because ultimately, they are just carrying out what the government has told them to do, policy decisions. But this is the conversation they had.
You're incentivizing the purchase of new cars, yet logbooks are taking a month.
Yes, and I'm very disappointed with that because I must tell you, look, I'm a consumer as well, and if I had bought a vehicle and I was very excited about getting that vehicle, I would want to have my logbook immediately. So making people wait for a month is, in my view, not acceptable. The Chief Secretary has heard from ministers that we don't consider that this is acceptable. He too has taken the view that this is entirely unacceptable and is pursuing with the people in that department how to make the system much more agile. Look, as a representative of the taxpayer, which is what your politicians are, this service is not good enough. We get it. We're trying to fix it.
Chief Secretary, what are you doing to fix that service?
Okay, and I completely agree with the Chief Minister there. The service was not acceptable, but it's equally unfair to blame the civil servants on the delivery of the service. Counters being shut for the right reasons meant that we had to interact with the public in a different way. And we certainly encountered trouble in duplication of work, where people understandably were trying to access, have access to information, etc., and they were bombarding the department, the relevant department, in different ways, and there was duplication of work. Let me tell you, moving forward, if you care now to check that we deployed support, and I know we'll go to other questions. We deployed support, and the situation there is far, far better, to be honest.
OK, thank you very much. Let's move on now to this spat between the GSD and the government over senior civil servants. The GSD says the government has a tendency to put civil servants in the front line to explain what are perceived to be difficult or unpopular issues. What's your view on that? Are you feeling that senior civil servants are being made to answer questions, really, when it should be the ministers that should be answering those questions?
To be fair, I I've got very good friends who make up the GSD. I am not privy to exactly what they meant here. Certainly, ministers should be put on the spot to answer on policy, whereas my SOs, including the Chief Secretary, should be asked questions on the delivering of that policy. It would be a real waste if some of my very experienced and hardened SOs, and even further down, people who have made being a civil servant with pride their careers. I'm, if you like, a little bit different. I'm your designated survivor, if you followed it on Brexit.
I did. Very good series.
I'm not a pure civil servant.
I hope you don't jump out of windows.
No, not at all. But in that sense, my journey, as you well know, is education. Therefore, I have to rely 100% on the knowledge of these very competent officers. And I'd like to say, for the benefit of your viewers, and I'm extremely proud of them and of the service in general. OK, that point is taken, but the GGCA says that the subject does need clarity. She says, Wendy Cumming, the president, a clear demarcation of political decision-making and administrative implementation of those decisions. Now, do you think that there is sometimes an overlap, as she suggests? Do government ministers sometimes adopt managerial functions within the departments? Okay, it's very hard to be a government minister or indeed a member of the opposition benches, because unlike in the UK, people do not get into a car and travel 40 kilometers to go home uninterfered by the public. Therefore, invariably and understandably and in a very caring manner, when people, ministers or members of the opposition benches, are held at Morrison's or they are held in different places and ask questions, it's very hard for them not to become involved. My job and the job of my senior officers is to ensure that there is a very clear distinction between what it means to distill policy and what it means to administer the policy. And my SOs fully well know that they are controlling officers, they are ultimately responsible for the delivering of the policy, and that the boundaries should be very clear.
So you reject what the GGCA have suggested then?
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that I reject it. I'm sure that Wendy, Wendy is very informed, and it's probably right. But I've tried to justify why it is so hard. It is so hard to divorce yourself from the process, because we live in this wonderful community where there is that interaction all the time.
Very quickly, I've got 2 quick-fire questions before we move on to the future of the civil service. What's your relationship with the Chief Minister?
Oh, my relationship with the Chief Minister. That's a good one. Well, he's not my friend, and I suppose neither am I his friend. It's a very professional relationship. But let me tell you, the reason why I became Chief Secretary, I'm sure he'll tell you if you asked him, is because he knows 100% that I will tell it to him as it is, A. B, he knows 100% that I will weave a safety net around him to deflect, to deal with all the other issues that are there so that he can actually concentrate on what he needs to concentrate on. And this would be the case, indeed, with another Chief Minister of whatever political flavour.
Okay, and your relationship with the unions, you've clashed with them on several occasions in the 2.5 years that you've been Chief Secretary.
Clashed because the spin on and maybe my words haven't been understood. I have the utmost respect for the unions. I have a wonderful relationship with Wendy, indeed with Unite, and more distant now because I haven't had a conversation with them with the NASWIS and GTA. Let's just call it simpler. But I have the utmost respect. My background is very working class, and I grew up having to see my parents work. So far from me not to have a relationship with the very people that are protecting the worker. There needs to be one clarification here, and that
very
is,
quickly, because we do need to move on.
And that is what it means to consult. I have a very clear idea of what it means to be consulted. They pay me for a particular reason, and to consult is one thing, but to be a stakeholder is something quite different. Insofar as I'm concerned, there's a Minister for Industrial Relations who's the Chief Minister.
Okay, we're going to end that there very quickly because we're running towards the end of the programme. Unfortunately, I did have quite a lot of questions about the future, but let's just talk about the sustainability of the public service. Is it, so Joe Bassano has said it is unsustainable. You've said that civil servants need to do more for less. And also, there's the question of 85 vacancies for AAs and AOs. So can you just answer all those issues in one very quick minute? Okay,
more for less, terribly misunderstood. We all had to put shoulder together to get us out of COVID and indeed in a post-COVID era to be able to deliver on Gibraltar PLC. Right?
Okay.
Right. AAs recruitment will happen. It's just that the jigsaw puzzle we assemble at the end of the process, honouring the actual vacancies, which we will fill up.
When? It's been going on for years, this issue.
Soon.
Okay.
Okay. And what else do you ask me?
About, is the public sector sustainable? So Joe has said it's unsustainable as it is.
We need to be very careful about how we spend our money. And the journey that we are caught in is a very delicate journey. I'm not saying anything new. So Joe, the Chief Minister, indeed, dare I say, anybody who cares to analyse a scenario is going to come up with the same conclusion. But I got faith that we will make it through. Right.
No one's going to lose their jobs then?
Absolutely not.
And you will be recruiting the 85?
We will be recruiting the 85 in due course, in a different way to how the jigsaw puzzle is assembled now.
Right, a certain amount of restructuring within
but
departments.
Restructuring doesn't mean changing job descriptions, salaries, etc., because I know you.
You got that in right at the end. Chief Secretary, I would love to speak to you about how you switch off at the end of the day, learn more about the person behind the job.
I swim.
But unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you very much, listeners, for joining us on Lunchtime Live today. It's just coming up to 2 o'clock on Radio Gibraltar.